Hello. We have been discussing various elements that are used in writing poetry, such as word choice and rhyme. Today we are going to talk about the use of rhythm in poetry. When you think of rhythm, you might think of a beat, such as that you might hear when a drum is played. Rhythm is definitely part of music, but it is used in a similar way in poetry to create a certain sound. Rhythm is a pattern of recurrence, which means that elements are repeated in poetry to create a certain sound. Rhythm is also the pattern formed in a poem by stressed and unstressed syllables. And you might remember that syllables are the number of beats a word has. Words can have 1, 2, 3, or more syllables. Some examples are hall, which has 1 syllable, hallway, which has 2 syllables, and principal, which has 3 syllables. Some people like to clap out the syllables to count how many syllables there are. When creating rhyme and rhythm, poets use these things. Repetition, which means they repeat words, phrases, or sounds. They also use line length. Poets create poems with lines of varying lengths. Longer and shorter lines create different rhythms in the poem. They also use pauses. Pauses are also related to line length and where the poet decided to break the line. And lastly, poets use meter. Meter refers to the stressed and unstressed syllables within the lines of the poem. We are going to look at rhythm in this poem by Tupac Shakur. Tupac was a rap star as well as a poet. He used rhythm in both his raps and his poems to create a certain effect. This is a good example of how music and poetry can be very similar. I am going to read the poem, and then I will go through it again and point out the different elements that Tupac used to create rhythm in his poem. This poem is called In the Depths of Solitude. I exist in the depths of solitude, pondering my true goal, trying to find peace of mind and still preserve my soul, constantly yearning to be accepted and from all receive respect, never compromising, but sometimes risky, and that is my only regret. A young heart with an old soul, how can there be peace? How can I be in the depths of solitude when there are two inside of me? This duo within causes the perfect opportunity to learn and live twice as fast as those who accept simplicity. Okay, so let's look back at how Tupac used repetition. Well, Tupac uses repetition in words, phrases, and sounds in his poem. He uses all of those. He repeats words like goal, actually not goal, I'm sorry. He repeats words like soul here in the first stanza and in the second stanza. He also repeats the word peace right here and also right here. He also repeats phrases. He repeats the phrase in the depths of solitude both in the first stanza and the second stanza. There are also sounds that he repeats, and he repeats these in the words opportunity and simplicity. Even though those words don't rhyme, they sound very similar and they add to the rhythm of the poem. There are also sounds that are repeated in this poem. We've talked before about alliteration, and Tupac uses alliteration in this poem to create a certain rhythm. One type of alliteration he uses is he repeats this R sound in the words receive, respect, risky, and regret. And you can also see alliteration down here in to learn and live, where he repeats that L sound. So Tupac uses a lot of examples of repetition in his poem to add to the rhythm. The other thing that he uses is line length. You'll see that all of his lines are relatively short, but that some are longer than others. And it does seem to alternate between some lines that are longer and some lines that are shorter. Doing this creates a certain sound and rhythm in his poetry. He also uses those pauses that we talked about earlier too. If you look at these first 4 lines of the poem, those are actually all one sentence. If I read it, I exist in the depths of solitude, pondering my true goal, trying to find peace of mind and still preserve my soul. If I were to punctuate that, like a sentence in an essay or a story, I would put a comma here, and I would put a period here at the end, and that's not a very good period, but a period there at the end, and that would be my sentence. And I wouldn't break it up like it's broken up here in this poem. I would just write it across until I got to the end of the line and then keep going. But because this is a poem, Tupac has chosen to break that line, and by doing so, what he has done is he has created pauses in the poem where he wants you to kind of stop, maybe think about what he's just said, or to create a certain sound or rhythm like we're talking about. So everywhere the line breaks, after solitude, goal, mind, and soul, the reader will pause because he's gotten to the end of that line, and that pause will add to the rhythm of the poem. There's also meter in this poem. Now, some poems use a very regular meter where it's the same for every line of the poem, but Tupac uses a varied meter in his poem. So I'm going to clap out just the first few lines. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to clap out the sound, the rhythm of the words. And I want you to listen to it. This will be the meter of the poem. So I just clapped out those first 4 lines that we just talked about, and that was the meter of those poems. Rhythm plays into the meter, but meter is just part of the rhythm. The rhythm is all of those things: repetition, line length, pauses, and meter all combined, where meter is just the way the words and the syllables are stressed or unstressed within those lines. So we're going to look at a précis that includes some examples of a type of poetry known as slam poetry. This poetry is very similar to rap music, except it doesn't have any music with it. These poets really use rhythm in their poems to get their point across. Watch the 3 different examples of slam poetry, and then you will work on an activity of your own.